Right, to talk more about this, we speak to Mametlwe Sebei, President of GIWUSA. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you to you and to your viewers.
What is the situation as we speak regarding those who are housed in this area?
Terrible, absolute disaster. I mean, these are people that, as you correctly said, they are coming out of a tragic fire that cost 77 lives. The people that have been relocated to Denver are the survivors of that fire. They lost everything in that fire. Many of them sustained injuries, and therefore this tragic flooding is a tragedy upon tragedy, in a sense that having lost all that they had, until that fire, they were relocated to other emergency places. And I think one of them is Denver, where about 30 to 40 families that survived the Mametlwe fire are actually located there, along other residents of that informal settlement. And what happened is that few weeks ago, that informal settlement was hit by fire that razed to the ground many shacks. And today now they are suffering from heavy rains that resulted in flooding of the area due to a poor housing condition, due to a poor public infrastructure, including lack of roads, and as well as storm drainage systems that I think speak to lack of a program as well as public infrastructure to respond to this an increasingly recurrent extreme weather as a result of the deepening crisis of climate change.
What was communicated to these residents when, as we mentioned, from the onset, this was meant to be temporary housing? Now that interpretation is from according to whose understanding is being proffered. What did government say to these residents when they put them in Denver? We mentioned the fire was in August, we're now in January.
Look, they have just been moving them from one temporary accommodation to the other. And I'll say that these are the most fortunate. Others, either are detained at Lindela, a repatriation center. Those are the ones that are, migrants, and others were forced to abandon their life in the city for rural areas of KZN and other parts of rural South Africa where they come from, simply because government has not been able to attend to the tragedy as well as to really ensure justice for the victims and survivors. The reality is that, if anything, government from the beginning has been bashing the victims of that fire, and their approach, that of the city of Johannesburg, but the entire political establishment has been to bash and scapegoat the victims for the neglect of their own city, of their own officials, and of their own successive administrations of the city that created conditions for that fire. But more than that, what we are seeing here is a crisis that is not unique to the victims of that fire. And as I said, there are other residents in this informal settlement that are actually affected, but there are also other victims of similar, even if as not tragic, situations where fires razed shacks to the ground, where people were being forced to relocate from where they were staying due to similar disasters like flooding and so on, who are placed in this kind of temporary accommodation, which we are told is emergency accommodation, but often than not they turn into permanent accommodation, far from schools, far from workplaces, far from where people have established communities and any livelihoods. And this is because I think this government doesn't have the solution to the crisis of housing in general, and I think that is reflected by the continued, situation of dilapidation in the inner city of Johannesburg, where over 220 of a building such as the one that caught fire at Mametlwe are still there. They have not been upgraded in the past few months. But more than that, there is many people in the city of Johannesburg, but across all the major urban centers, that are staying in informal settlements without a proper housing, without proper amenities such as access to water, electricity, as well as roads and any infrastructure that can insulate people from this kind of disasters.
I am inclined to agree with you to the extent that the problem of growing urbanization certainly does seem to be squeezing government in terms of what to do with the mushrooming informal settlements. But on the one hand, you have these hijacked buildings where law enforcement, try as it might, is also not keeping up with ensuring that it protects people. What are you suggesting? What action can be taken by the likes of GIWUSA to stop this abuse? Because you say some of these people are even moved to the Lindela repatriation center where they are further abused.
Look, let's be clear about it. The question of so-called hijacked buildings is a reflection of a criminal neglect by the state. Some of, if not most of those buildings belong to the city of Johannesburg, as they do also belong to other, metropolitan administrations in other urban centers. And what happened is that the officials collaborate with an organized criminal syndicates to basically divest the city of ownership of those buildings, and in order that those organized criminal syndicates then take over the buildings with the collaboration of the city official and, of course, the political principals, that is the councillors, the metro executive governance structures simply overlook this, because for them, when these buildings are outside of their control and responsibility, it means they don't have to provide water. They don't have to provide the kind of services that are actually required. And what then we have is that then these criminal syndicates extort disparate and poor people who are forced to come to urban centers like Johannesburg for many reasons, in search of jobs, in search of access to education. And people imagine that it's only just migrants. If anything, majority of the victims and the survivors of that fire actually are South Africans. And it's not just the unemployed. I met during the course of this campaign young people that are studying at UJ, and I've asked them, why are you staying in conditions like this? They said to me, there is no accommodation and campus, and the only option I have is whether I continue to live in this situation or actually go back home and in so doing abandon the prospects of obtaining the kind of education that I need. But it's not only people that are here for education, right? I, for one, I'm originally from Limpopo, and I can tell you, lots of my family members, when they are sick, I have to register them in my family flat in Pretoria so that they are able to get an access to best health facilities. Because where I come from, there's a hospital that has been under construction for past 20 years. It is still a community health care center even to this very day. So people are forced to migrate to urban centers for a number of reasons. And government simply has no solution to that problem. Look at the city of Johannesburg itself. The population there is growing by between 120 to 150,000 people per year. That translates into 1.5 million people over a period of 10 years. At the rate at which the city is building houses, which is 2,500 only, not only does it mean that the city will not only be able to meet the current backlog of 500,000 housing units that are in need for them to just give access to the people on the waiting list, right? I mean, the rate at which they are building the houses, it means it will take them 200 years just to build sufficient number of houses for the 500,000 people that are in need at the present moment. Now, when you factor the growth of population along the line that I've provided, that is 1.5 million over a period of 10 years, it means this government will simply and will never be able to tackle the crisis of housing in the city of Johannesburg. But I think that is also an international problem. It is a problem of capitalism, not only in this country, but globally. And I think it has been aggravated by neoliberal austerity measures, and particularly cuts on spending of public housing and other services in the past 29 years of the ANC rule. And I think that's a problem.
I wish we could talk further, because you also do mention fossil fuel capitalism as being at the center of this particular problem. Mametlwe Sebei of GIWUSA, president of GIWUSA, just speaking about the fate of those who are at Denver informal settlements. They were the victims of that explosion in downtown Johannesburg when they lost their homes.